Hello and welcome. Today I want to talk about cosmic horror and movies. When you hear the term cosmic horror, you must probably think of interdimensional threats, mind-shattering monsters, and impending inevitable doom. Some would also point to the great horror fiction writer HP Lovecraft, creator of the Cthulhu mythos and a whole world full of ancient evils and great old ones, reality-bending deities that exist in a way that is beyond human understanding. I want to talk about why I love the world of HP Lovecraft's creations. I think it's the idea that there is something out there, forces beyond our control and comprehension, colossal gods that exist in other dimensions. The very thought, or even seeing one, would destroy one's sanity. I believe it to be the true essence of horror. Not something you can fight, something you can learn about simply and stop. An unknown alien force working slowly, gradually spreading doom and chaos until its goal is complete. As Lovecraft himself once said, the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is that of the unknown. I love the whole roster of ancient evils, gods and deities, each with their own horrific description and plan to wreak havoc upon the world. This brings me onto movies, and why there are so few great cosmic horror movies. The Thing is probably the most famous one. I remember seeing The Thing when I was about 12 years old, and it scared the crap out of me. It wasn't just the grotesque body horror imagery that was burned into my brain for years afterwards, but the idea of this almost unstoppable force, a being beyond understanding and rationality. Little did I know that despite being put off horror for a long time afterwards, it didn't eventually draw me back, coming full circle. This brings me onto The Colour Out of Space, directed by Richard Stanley, based on the short story by HP Lovecraft. The story of Colour Out of Space is quite simple. Nathan Gardner and his family trying to adapt to a new life away from the city in a remote farmstead. One night, a strange meteorite crashes near their home, digs into the earth, and slowly infects and corrupts the land and life forms around it. I was drawn to this movie partly because it appeared to be a Lovecraft tale done right, and because of the legendary Nicolas Cage. I know he has done his fair share of stinkers in his career, but from the classics like Canal and Face Off, every now and then he does a project and you can tell it's just right for him. After some narration, we meet hydrologist Ward Phillips, who upon being sent to survey the water in the area, bumps into the daughter of the Gardner family, Lavinia, who's into the occult and rituals, a bit of a gothic outcast, and even has a copy of the Necronomicon in her room, a reference to the infamous book from H.P. Lovecraft's tales. We then meet the whole family. They live on a farm in rural England, trying to milk alpacas. Their father, Nathan, determined to make a living away from the city, lives with his wife Teresa, recently recovering from a mastectomy, the eldest son Benny, typical Sarah teenager, and the youngest son, Jack. One evening, while Nathan and Teresa are making love, while the rest of the family settle down for the night, a strange pinky purple meteorite descends from the skies and hits the ground near the house. One of my favourite things about this movie is the way the filmmakers show the effects of the colour out of space. In this scene, and throughout the film, as the alien entity corrupts and distorts everything around it, there's a real chaotic blend of beautiful and haunting music, otherworldly sounds, vibrations and bizarre visual effects. As mentioned earlier, a lot of the effects of seeing or simply being near any of the Lovecraft's gods or monsters is meant to be so mind-bending that simply trying to comprehend it can render someone insane. It's really great to have a film treat its source material with such respect. We're never really shown the colour out of space in its true form. Its effects are never quite clear, never properly explained, and our characters slowly start to go mad as they can't understand what's happening to them. The meteorite starts to slowly affect everyone around it, from the colours of the surrounding trees and grass to making unusual plants. It affects each family member differently. The mother, in a daze, cuts off her fingers slicing some carrots. While Nathan takes her to the hospital, Benny is left to put the alpacas in their stables, but doesn't return till the evening. It appears for him time passed instantly. Jack is drawn to the object and begins to communicate with a man in the well. Lavinia tries to call Nathan, but the signals are messed up. It's not just a bad reception. What she hears on her end is completely different to what her father in the hospital is telling her. This brings me back to my point earlier. the filmmakers get what the effects of a Lovecraftian god or ancient one would have on others. This isn't something you can simply understand or bargain with. You can't fight back or get help. It's one of the best characteristics of a horror film, the feeling of helplessness against the unknown. Local authorities and news reporters are also drawn to the gardener's home. Ward tries to understand it. He eventually starts to believe it's something in the water supply and suggests to everyone not to drink the water. The entity also affects Ward one night when he's out surveying in the woods. Strange noises and a weird sort of mist appear around him. His radio turns on and even his car engine starts and begins to rev up despite there being no one around. I like this is established quite early on, to throw people off exactly what the colour out of space can be. It isn't a creature or god, it doesn't just affect the air or water, it goes beyond the basic elements, taps further into the unknown. When Nathan and Teresa return, we start to get a glimpse of the effects this is all having on Nathan. We start to soon see the Nicolas Cage in his rage-fueled over-the-top glory, lashing out at his kids, losing his mind after he thinks the vegetables are growing rapidly, only to find them rotten and bitter. He does a great job here of playing a man on a knife's edge, ready to snap at a moment's notice. He keeps you guessing, will he laugh and try to apologise to his family, or lash out and verbally or physically attack someone? Not long after this, Levine decides to perform a Wiccan ceremony, after her frustrations over the effect the colour out of space is starting to have on her sanity. It is an act of desperation. She cuts herself and prays for her safety. Little does she know it'll have no effect. Antagonists in the Cthulhu mythos have little regard of the actions and beliefs of humans. To them, we're simply irrelevant. We are merely bacteria forming near them, minute in comparison, destined to be either ignored or exterminated. It doesn't matter how strong you are, what your religious beliefs are. You don't plead if any of the great old ones, although some can be a little more forgiving, such as Yog-Sothoth, who is not particularly evil in a sense, and with some preparation can even be bargained with for information. I want to point out here that the colour out of space has some superb cinematography, particularly towards the third act of the movie, as the corruption from the entity spreads. The land around the gardener's home becomes more warped and otherworldly. The visuals and music are beautiful and haunting. Images and sounds stick with you after the movie ends. It's a sign that you're witnessing something truly unique and one of a kind. The body horror starts to ramp up at this point in the film. Not only with Teresa's knife accident and Nathan's rotting skin comes close to the level in which the colour out of space decides to go full on the thing here. Jack and Benny enter the barn, searching for the alpaca and their dog, only to find a grotesque fusion of flesh and veins. A horrific mound of bloody mass sits in the corner. Among it protrude numerous heads and snarling mouths. I love the reveal here. Rather than a simple jump scare or just cutting to the monstrosity, the two children slowly approach the growls and groans of the combined animals. Then, through close-ups and slow camera pans, start to pick out small details of the creature. Eyes, teeth, limbs, and anything that can resemble some biology we can recognise. It's how I imagine one would react to the sight of something this bizarre and mind-bending, trying to piece together any parts that can be identified. Teresa hears the screams and runs outside to investigate. As she grabs hold of Jack to protect him, a flash of cosmic energy and light strike from the barn and latch itself around mother and son. Nathan runs up to check on the commotion and is confronted with a most disturbing sight. Teresa and Jack have been fused together. It is disgusting to witness. They bring them inside and decide what to do, all the while the moaning and crying of the fused characters start to drive Nathan more towards the edge. I really want to compliment the visual effects designs for this movie. I might be biased here, but I love practical effects. Animatronics, puppetry for me anyways, works so much better in film. There's something about a physical creation, and the way that it just looks and moves is far superior to anything computer generated. The way the light hits it, how actors can interact with it, and how we can appreciate the effort really appeals to me. It's why I love the 1980s era visual effects of movies. The Thing, Hellraiser, The Fly, American Werewolf in London have these images that I've been seeing to my brain and stuck with me here to this day. Combined with mutations on the people and animals, the colour out of space has now started to seriously affect all electronics around the house. TVs, radios, phones won't work. The car won't start, and it starts to look like all hope is lost for the gardeners. Nathan's carbon control is now reaching critical levels. He moves Teresa and Jack to the attic and decides, either as an act of mercy or revenge for his attack on his wife and son, takes up a shotgun and decides to pay the alpaca dog mutation a visit. He unloads doesn't stop firing until there's nothing left but a mass of blood and guts sprayed all over the barn and his body. Nicolas Cage is often known for his overacting and insane bouts of rage, yet here it works for him. He really sells it as his father trying his best to stay in control of the situation, and when he acts out and his sanity is breaking, you can feel the pain and anger in his performance. Lavinia and Benny conspire to leave the farm. However, after hearing barking from the well, Benny decides to try and see if the dog is down there, only to be assimilated by the colour. Nathan lashes out and locks Lavinia in the attic with her mother and brother, only to find a horrific creation that reveals itself in the shadows and crawls over to attack her. Whether a direct homage to The Thing or not, it really does remind me of that movie, how the unknown mutations slowly escalate and reveal themselves in more grotesque ways. At this point, Ward and the town sheriff are shown by some locals a few massive animals and decide to head to the Gardner home. When they get there, they talk to Nathan, who has now gone beyond insane and appears to be talking complete gibberish. Talking to people who aren't even there, and when asked about his family, he just says, "They're all here," pointing to an empty living room. The two rush upstairs and burst into the attic to discover the monster attacking Lavinia, yet it is Nathan who comes in to finish them off, saying they aren't his family. After they flee the home, the colour is emerging from the well at an alarming rate. Outside the Gardner home, it's starting to become barely recognisable, a complete hostile alien takeover. Nathan glances at the well, sees this force that's been destroying his life. Then, in either an act of revenge or possibly a portion of his sanity control returning, takes aim with his gun at the entity. The sheriff, mistaking this for a possible shot at Ward, shoots Nathan, taking him down. Lavinia now decides to stay with her family, making a complete U-turn. Rather than putting her life first, decides staying behind with her father is more important. Ward and the sheriff decide to make a run for the nearby hut in the woods owned by a local resident, Urza, who so far has been trying to track and identify the reason for the colour out of space. Instead of finding him there, they find instead his corpse, decaying as if it had been sat there for years. His recordings play in the background on repeat, saying that the colour has tried to remake Earth into something it knows, wherever it came from. They flee as the whole ground now is shaking, the surroundings, the air, the lights, the atmosphere itself is collapsing. A mutated tree snatches the sheriff and Ward flees back to the Gardner home to see Lavinia stood in a trance. She turns around and appears to be completely taken by the colour, absorbing into it. Ward is then shown a brief glimpse of where the colour hails from. A look behind the veil, a planet full of bizarre shapes and tentacles and otherworldly visuals. Although I was kind of hoping to see an actual ancient one, I felt with the film's budget, visually it achieves what I thought, in my opinion, a planet beyond our understanding would look like. It nearly takes Ward, almost breaking him, and sticks him to the ground. Luckily, he breaks free and runs to the home to find shelter. At this point we see more impressive audio and visual effects as the colour is now exploding into the sky, funneling its powers into the skies. The house is barely hanging onto its foundations, almost like the end of the world. Inside, Nathan confronts him. Space and time are now unravelling and distorting in ways beyond human comprehension. We briefly see a flash of light and the rest of the family appear sitting in the living room, watching Nathan. As Nathan attacks Ward, we hear him speaking the same lines he said earlier in the film, showing now how time has warped, which I'll explain my thoughts on in a second. He manages to lock himself in the cellar and wait out the explosion. Once the colour has reached critical mass, it practically nukes the area around it. Ward emerges, and the camera pans up to show us a large white patch of the ground around the home, like a burned patch of ground covered in white ashes. The film then ends with Ward watching the sunset and discussing the events he has seen. He says he'll never drink the damn water from here again. So why do I love this movie? Why do I consider it not only a great work of cosmic horror, but a superb adaptation of Lovecraft's work? It treats the elements of cosmic horror with respect. It focuses on the impending doom and lack of understanding of the horrors afflicted upon the characters. It makes you feel as lost and hopeless, poisoned and broken as the Gardner family. There are no jump scares here, no cliches or tropes. This isn't a film with a clearly motivated or even visible foe. There's no scene of actors researching and figuring out a weakness or a way out. It shows us that a threat beyond our understanding is so mind-shattering that even trying to understand it can render one insane. I wanted to try to explain my understanding of the events of the film. There's not really a clear explanation here, but I wanted to talk about what I think the colour out of space was and how its effects worked. This comes from a combination of reading Lovecraft's work and other adaptations and entries to the lore. I believe the colour out of space, the meteorite itself, is some sort of egg, containing the infants of its race, sent out to our world from its own to feed and grow, then to return back to the depths of the cosmos from whence it came. As it lands, the egg breaks, sinks to the ground, presumably near water. Then the larva form, which we see briefly when Benny descends into the well, spreads its effects across the land. Starting small at first with plants and trees, it then spreads to small life forms, eventually larger ones and humans, possibly depending on their size, maybe the power of the minds and resistance. It corrupts and changes everything to match where it came from. Not just in shape and colour and weird mutations, but even time and reality itself, gradually progressing its poisonous reach. The reason why the alpaca and Teresa and Jack respond so violently to the effects could be because biology cannot simply accept the powers of the colour out of space. The horrific fusions of flesh and bone could be what happens when its effects hit species not like its own. Once its effects are well established, it could slowly feed on everything around it. I believe the colour out of space has a great effect on time and reality itself. A lot of points throughout the film, the clocks don't seem to work. Benny gets lost in the dark of the alpaca all night, despite for him only feeling like a minute. When Nathan's talking to his family and saying they're all here, possibly to him they are. It's hard to process how time and space would work from a force beyond our own world. Time for us could be a straight line. However, after the colour's effects, it could become a tangled web. When Jack is talking to a man in the well, that could very well be Benny, trapped in time down there, as the events when he fell down may have already happened. Each character in this film experiences and reacts to the colour out of space differently, and I feel the director wanted to give us a full spectrum of human emotions and responses to the damage caused by cosmic horror. We have Ward, a hydrologist, who believes, at least at first, in science and reason, feeling that it's the water contamination affecting people's health. Lavinia is the religious type who believes her faith can protect her, rituals and practices can keep her safe. Despite her prayers, she is taken fully by the colour out of space. Whether she is dead or alive is a mystery. However, she isn't harmed by the Teresa Jack mutated monster in the attic, so maybe some of that might have worked. Teresa is a concerned mother, more focused on keeping her children safe and out of harm's way. Benny is a stoner teenager whose ignorance and eventual rational thinking cave in when he believes he can save the family dog when it's in danger. Jack is hit hard early on by the light from the meteorite and maybe feels connected to it, like it's his friend and he communicate with it. Nathan is a controlling but calm father, just wants to succeed with his farming career. He tries to calm everyone down and keep everyone in check before eventually succumbing to insanity. Urza is someone who instantly is wary and cautious of the colour out of space. He immediately recognises its threat and works hard and fast to try and understand it. Ultimately, despite everyone's beliefs and efforts, in the end it is futile. Your religion, strength, willpower and heart have no chance of saving you. To this entity, we are merely insects, destined to be swatted away and cast aside. I'm going to finish this review with one of my favourite Lovecraft quotes, which I believe relates to this movie perfectly. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to tolerate all of its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of the infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far.